Welcome back to the Vandy 24/7 podcast. Brandon Bigsby and I here at Memorial Gymnasium. Not the prettiest game Vanderbilt has played this year, Brandon, but Devon McGlockton becomes the hero. Nick Pringle, as Lamont Paris said, caught it with 2 feet in the paint. It's in a pretty advantageous position, as he said, and Devon McGlockton kind of comes out of nowhere, blocks it. On the other end, plays drawn up for A.J. Hogarth. He gets a good look, misses it, and guess who? Devon McGlockton's right there. Vanderbilt wins with the N1. Mark Weinstein, I think, regretted a little bit not having McGlockton miss the free throw, but it all worked out in the end. Vanderbilt wins 66-63, moves to 2-2 in the league, and Brandon, Vanderbilt really needed that one. They've got 4 out of their next 5 games against top 10 opponents. We talk about gauntlets. That's a gauntlet, and if you head into that game after a loss to a team that's going to be a quad 3 game, I mean, that is just almost insurmountable. It feels like Vanderbilt had to have this one, and I don't know that this is season altering, and I'm not sure I buy into the must win narrative in January, but if there was a game that was must win, it felt like tonight Vanderbilt got it done. And the story of the night, besides that, Devon McGlockton, the hero.
Yeah, and I mean, really, Devon McGlockton, and I'll have a piece coming out about this either tonight or tomorrow. He's really been the unsung hero for this team for so much of the season. I mean, we've heard Mark Byington just kind of rave about how Devon McGlockton is one of those guys that just kind of goes in, he shows up, he plays his role, does it to a T, doesn't matter what he's asked, and he always seems to kind of be at the right place at the right time and steps up in these situations where Vanderbilt really needs him. And it's not always necessarily with like a big shot or a big steal, like maybe a Jason Edwards hitting a big 3 or maybe a A.J. Hogarth making a big steal or something like that. But he just seems to always be that one consistent presence for this Vanderbilt team, really game in, game out. And I know you mentioned this, Joey, you never want to throw out the must-win talk on January 15th, and I definitely agree with you, but I feel like you and me probably could agree with this, and a lot of, outside people would probably say this. Vanderbilt may have saw their bubble drifting away on them a little bit with about 40 seconds left when South Carolina had the ball. And, it's one thing to take a tough loss in the SEC, but a quad 3 game, the only quad 3 game you're going to have on the schedule, it's not a loss Vanderbilt really could afford to take either. So, you don't want to go too far and say that Devon McGlockton saved Vanderbilt's tournament hopes, but I do think that if we're looking back at this in March and Vanderbilt does find themselves into the 60-18 field, I feel like that play, Devon McGlockton getting that rebound, going up, converting on the N1, that could very well be one where we look back and say that was the difference between Vanderbilt being an 11 or 12 seed and playing in March or not making and being in the NIT.
Yeah, so much of making the NCAA tournament is avoiding bad losses, or at least avoiding a multitude of bad losses. Vanderbilt, for the most part, done that this year. I don't think the Drake one's going to be super kind to them in the metrics, but that's also a good team who I think is probably going to end up in quad 2 on a neutral court. Tonight would have been a quad 3, like we mentioned, and that's important. That would have been their worst loss of the season, and I think it would have just been demoralizing heading into the stretch that they're going into. A.J. Hogarth even said tonight they needed that confidence, and they got it tonight. And that's kind of the microcosm of the game. They needed it, and they got it. It certainly wasn't pretty. They shot at 41% from the field. They turned it over double-digit times. I think the reason they won this game was not only because of McGlockton, but also forced 25 turnovers, scored a bunch of points off of them. Mark Byington made sure to note every single turnover. I don't know why I said 21. I was looking at the 25. I had written 25 like 5 times. Give me a break. Long night. We'll get it tomorrow.
Hey, no one's perfect. No one's perfect.
And Vanderbilt certainly was not tonight, but you know what? That doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It matters when you're playing Citadel. It matters when you're playing Austin Peay. A game like this, you just got to win. And Vanderbilt won. Now it gives itself a chance down the line, and that's what it's done all year. It's given itself a chance to play meaningful basketball moving forward. We'll see how big that chance is coming out of this 5-game stretch they have, but Brandon, Vanderbilt basketball is alive right now. It might have to change his blueprint a little bit, because I don't know if it's going to be able to get 25 turnovers forced every night. And Lamont Paris, I think, gave me some confidence that they might be able to do it a little bit more. He's talking about how there was a number of clean strips that Vanderbilt got, and that was encouraging to hear, because I was wondering how many of the turnovers they had forced were South Carolina's fault and the byproduct of them only having one ball handler with their other ball handler injured. But besides the point, not pretty, doesn't matter, Brandon. Vanderbilt wins, and I think that's the big story of the night.
Yeah, and not only that, but they also won shorthanded. Remember, Grant Huffman not in this game tonight. And, I know Mark Byington said they hope to get him back soon, but that's a more significant loss, I think, than what some people might think. I mean, I know Grant Huffman isn't a guy that's averaging 18 points per game like a Jason Edwards or averaging how many ever rebounds or assists a game, but he does a lot for this team on the defensive end. He's one of their primary ball handlers. That's a really significant piece, and it knocks down some of that depth that I think that you've seen Vanderbilt really rely on. I mean, you saw MJ Collins, he played 27 minutes tonight. I don't think we see MJ Collins playing 27 minutes if Grant Huffman is out there and starting, and that's no knock against MJ Collins. I think he's been really improved actually over this last 2 or 3 weeks, but it just kind of goes to show you that Vanderbilt also being shorthanded as well, without one of their better ball handlers, without one of their main facilitators, and arguably one of their better defensive guards, we're still able to go out there and get a win despite that. And, you know, again, you kind of mentioned it, the defense, I think, a really big story, which we haven't talked about a whole lot, but Vanderbilt looks a lot better, I think, defensively in January than maybe what I thought they would at the beginning of the season. I think in terms of concerns with this team, I've gotten to the point where I'm more concerned about the shooting than I am the defense, and I don't think I would have been saying that in September. So that's the one thing I do kind of wonder about, is that the shooting is not getting significantly better. Mark Byington even said himself that he didn't like a lot of the shots they took, that he didn't feel like they were necessarily open ones, but nevertheless, I do think that the way the defense has started to kind of show up and it's started to find itself, it's still far from perfect. There was still some blow-bys. There was a couple of times where I remember Jason Edwards, South Carolina, was really kind of picking on him in that second half in the first 10 minutes, and he took him out for a little bit and they kind of slowed it down. But nevertheless, I think that you're seeing this team continue to grow and continue to develop an identity, and that's kind of been what we said since the earlier part of the season was going to be the key for Vanderbilt, was development, showing growth, showing that they're improved. And I think that even in a game like this, you still saw little signs of that in certain areas tonight.
For sure. They definitely have been better defensively than I would have thought they would have been to this point. Now, I think that comes with a caveat of, like, I'm still worried about their defense in some senses because they're going to play a bunch of really good teams in a row, and I don't know how many turnovers and steals they're going to be able to generate, but also, you got to give them credit for what they did tonight. They held South Carolina to 42% shooting from the field, forced 25 turnovers, and I think the rebounding was the story tonight. This was one of the first times, and there's been a couple, but one of the first times that I've really noticed that they were outmanned in the front court. A lot of that was due to Jalen Carey being in foul trouble. That's an important thing we talked about all along, and tonight he was in foul trouble essentially the whole night, but luckily for Vanderbilt, so was Nick Pringle. It was certainly not a pretty game, and for everything that Vanderbilt did poorly, it felt like South Carolina did it more poorly. It never felt to me like this was going to be a game Vanderbilt lost. Even Colin Murray-Boyles misses the 2 free throws on the other end, and A.J. Hogarth turns it over, and then Nick Pringle gets blocked. So there was a lot of wiggle room for Vanderbilt in this game. That's not going to happen in the next 5 games, but you just got to take it for tonight, because I think they're going to be better than they were tonight against a lot of teams. Now, the shooting is a worry, Brandon.
Yeah.
We've talked about it all year. Hasn't necessarily got better. They shot at 19% from 3 tonight. Can't happen. Can't happen in Tuscaloosa. Can't happen when they play Tennessee on Saturday. They've got a lot of room to go there, and I am a little worried, kind of like I was when they lost the 2 games last week. What happens when they have to play with their left hand, when they don't force 25 turnovers? That's my biggest worry right now, and I don't think I feel any better about this team tonight than I did yesterday or heading into the game. I think I might even feel worse, but coming out of it, you're looking at it and saying, well, they escaped, and one of the biggest things in resume building is avoiding the bad loss. They did it tonight. They've got to be better. They know that, but they're winning, and that's what matters right now. They snapped a 2-game losing streak, and heading into the Tennessee game and heading into Tuscaloosa next week on a 3-game losing streak, that would have been killer. And that's the bigger thing tonight than what they did was what they avoided.
Yeah, and, I'd personally agree with you. I know that, the negatives a lot of times can get lost in a game like this where you get a big win and it happened in the fashion that it did, where you get a bucket with 0.6 seconds left and that wins you the game. But I honestly have to agree with you. I think there's 2 ways you can look at it. You can look at it in terms of what you see on paper, and if you're looking at it that way, I don't feel like you feel any worse than you did because you won. And, Mark Byington made this point specifically in the presser. This is the same South Carolina team that almost beat Auburn just a week ago. So it's not like South Carolina, even though they are the worst team in the SEC, per a lot of people's opinion, it's still a pretty solid team that can go out and nearly beat the number 1 team in the country just 7 or 8 days ago. But I also think that there's a side of it to where you look at the whole picture in general and you say, okay, Vanderbilt had to have 25 South Carolina's turnovers. They had to have South Carolina shoot 42% from the field, 7 for 16 from 3, and they only were able to win by 3 because Devon McGlockton had a massive putback at the end of that game. I think there's 2 different ways you can look at it, and personally, I kind of prefer to look at it the whole picture, and I don't necessarily come out of this game necessarily more encouraged by Vanderbilt than when I came in. Am I just, oh, this team is worse than we thought? No, not necessarily. I think that this team is a lot better than what they showed today as well. But I think there's also a bit of a medium there to where we've seen this team and where they have been, and we've seen them, and I don't necessarily think this is their worst either, if that makes sense, depending on the matchup, depending on if a team doesn't have 25 turnovers. I just think Vanderbilt right now is a team that's a little bit too reliant on how the opposition ends up playing, if that makes sense. It takes a little bit too much of another team's doing compared to their own doing to really have these situations. And that's really, I think, the number one concern, because if you're an undersized team and you're struggling to shoot, then you're going to have to rely on being able to do things like forcing a lot of turnovers and playing well on the defensive end. And I just don't know if that is something that you can consistently rely on to carry over for this team game after game after game in an SEC where you have really 14 teams that very well could end up making the tournament right now or have at least resumes to say that we could be in the tournament.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. They're too reliant on the opposition at this point, and oftentimes they're going to be forced to play with their left hand because teams aren't going to turn it over. Teams are going to make more shots than them, and that's something that they're going to have to adjust to. They're going to have to make more shots, and that's the answer. Billy asked me a couple days ago, what do you want to see from this team? I said, make more shots. Simple as that. And tonight I thought they really lacked in that regard, but still found a way to win. That says something about it. But also, I don't think we should go along the lines of, man, they really know how to win. They really know how to make the huge play, because they had turnovers that were huge. AJ Hogarth had a flagrant that kept South Carolina in the game in some senses. He made the 2 big free throws, but there were too many live ball turnovers today. I thought there were too many mental mistakes late in the game. And that's sitting with me just as much as the Devon McGlockton plays. So I'm not ready to say that they are a veteran-laden team who knows how to win like I was a few weeks ago. I'm also not ready to say they're terrible, though. I think they are better than what they showed tonight, and we're going to continually see them get better throughout the course of the year if Mark Byington is what we think he is. And Brandon, I also want to bring this up. I was thinking about this as we were walking out of the court. Remember the last time they beat Tennessee was the Tyron Lawrence buzzer beater a few years ago. The game before that was a game against Ole Miss where you would have thought it was a Wednesday night of the SEC tournament game where both teams had quit. And then Vanderbilt comes out a few days later and beats Tennessee. So I'm not ruling out the idea that they could come in and just play at a different level than they have played to this point. And I think the score of that game might have been pretty similar as well. I don't remember it exactly, but somebody referenced that to me a day or two ago about how big that win was for that team. Maybe they could replicate that. I think that's the very optimistic point of view, but it almost felt like that game today where it felt like the first night of the SEC tournament, but it also felt like this team was better than what it showed too.
Yeah, and something about Tennessee, Joey, I know you've been here for a few years now, so you kind of know this too, but there's something about that rivalry to where it feels like both teams kind of play up a little bit. If you just look back historically, the one game that really stands out to me was 2019. There was the Bryce Drew 0-18 SEC year. Tennessee came in number 1 in the country, and it took, I think it was like 28 free throws from Grant Williams for Tennessee to beat Vanderbilt in overtime in what was arguably the worst Vanderbilt team in terms of statistics to ever play in this jump. There are just certain games and certain rivalries that mean a little bit more, and I think that elevates play a little bit. You heard AJ Hogarth and Devin McGlockton during the press conference. They both said, AJ Hogarth said, I'm viewing it just like Michigan and Michigan State. That's how I view that. Neither team likes each other. We both want to go out there and win that game, and we know it means a little bit more. Devin McGlockton referenced the football game back in November and how he could just feel that game meant a lot more to the school and to the team and to the fan base. And this is a game where Vanderbilt coming in with a lot more optimism than I think they have in the last 6 or 7 matchups against Tennessee. Very well could have that opportunity. Now, again, they're going to have to play significantly better than they did today. That game today, look, we don't know how Tennessee's going to show up. It's no South Carolina slight, but if Vanderbilt plays Saturday the way they did today, they're losing by 15 to 20.
Right.
I'm just going to be honest about that. They are. But I also think, again, that Vanderbilt has a couple of levels higher than what we saw today. I think that you'll see some guys make a few more shots. You'll see some of those defensive rotations hopefully tighten up a little bit because, again, in a game like that, you just feel like everyone locks in a little bit more because you know how much that means. And you could even maybe have a little bit of a sense to where you're looking a little bit too forward to that game potentially. And you're like, oh, South Carolina's rated last in the SEC. We're at home, and we have Tennessee right after. So there's a lot of variance there, but I think nevertheless that being able to, even if it wasn't pretty, even though it was a very small margin, being able to come out of this game with a win is huge for Vanderbilt. Not just for that, but again, for that tournament resume in March, because I just feel like this could have been a loss to where if you're comparing Vanderbilt with some other teams and you're in a committee, could have very well been a big stain for Vanderbilt as a quad 3 loss at home. Now, that's not something you have to worry about. It's done, it's dusted, it's behind you. You can just continue to kind of do what you have been doing, which might, again, not be the prettiest thing, but they're winning games and they're not losing games that they aren't supposed to be losing, so to speak.
For sure, and I think it's got to ratchet up a level as they get to the stretch. We're going to make a lot of that stretch. Brandon, also, two people who walked behind us a second ago know a lot about that Tennessee rivalry. Earl Bennett and Candace Story-Lee just walked behind us, so a little bit of a star feature in the background of our post-game reaction. But I'm Joey Dwyer. He's Brandon Bigsby. Vanderbilt survives against South Carolina, and big one on Saturday. Still a big one. It might not have been as big if they had lost this, but Vanderbilt survives again and keeps the resume alive. We'll talk to you throughout the week about that game on the channel, and Brandon and I will be here Saturday. So thank you guys for watching. God bless. We'll talk soon.